Welcome to Room 101 at Harrigan Compound West. It's story time. This week I'm smoking some Pease Abingdon, which is an interesting tobacco. Abingdon is a town in Virginia. It's also a town around London, but it's not a Virginian, nor is it an English mixture. It's a Balkan. And it's actually pretty good. I'm starting about halfway through the bowl with you today, and the first half of it was quite lovely. It's a little strange too, because something seems to happen whenever I get a hold of a Pease blend that I've never tried before. The first bowl I have is unremarkable or even offensive, and then a week later when I go to have that second one, it's like the angels sing from heaven, and so too this. This one's been very good the second time around. So we'll keep at it and see what it's like. But in the interim, I thought I might bring you back to my college days, late college days in Willington, Connecticut, where I lived and went to school in Storrs, Connecticut. It's about a 10-15 minute drive from Willington over to the school. And it was about an hour's drive, unfortunately, from Willington to where I worked. But, you make these things work when you have no choice. And on the date in question, it was December, right at the very end of the semester. And it was snowing outside, as it often did back then. And it was probably 6-8 inches. And I figured, well, it's just as well, but I can't get out because I really need to finish a paper. The professor had assigned it. It was due the next morning. He had indicated that he would not be amused if we tried to get him to accept late work, something that I internalized. And I got busy working on the paper. And I was about 4 hours into it, probably 2/3 of the way through the paper, when the power went out. And this is going to be a real problem, right? Because it's already nighttime. There's no power, which means there's no heat, which means I can't get the paper done, drive it into school, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what I ended up doing, I turned my stereo on and turned the volume all the way up, figuring that when the electricity came back on, it would snap into play, it would wake me up with its nasty volume, and I could get back to work on the paper. And I was a little concerned, actually, well, you might say scared, because this was back in the days when if you were working on a computer and the power went out, there was really no guarantee that your work would have been saved in any way, shape, or form. So I dealt with the very high likelihood that I probably have to start from scratch on the paper, and I did my best to take some notes on a piece of paper with a flashlight. And then I figured, well, I might as well just try to get some sleep. If and when the power comes on, I can get back to it. And back then I had a pet iguana. I know this is not the ideal pet, but save your criticisms. It makes for a more interesting story because I took the iguana and I went to bed. Now, he's a cold-blooded creature, so the only warmth he can get in that entire apartment was from me. And I laid him on my chest, put the blanket over us both, and dipped off to sleep the way you do with your pet iguana in the bed. And some hours later, about 4:30 in the morning, the stereo went off like a bazooka. It was unbelievably loud. It just hammered away at me until I stumbled over to turn it off. All the lights, of course, had come on as well. And I realized that the iguana had gone missing, which was probably going to prove to be a problem later. Anyway, I made my way back over to the desk and turned the computer on again and waited with very bated breath to see if my paper still existed. And lo and behold, the thing booted up, and boot ups used to take about 2 minutes back then. It booted up, and I looked at the screen, and there it was, my entire paper, minus about 2 paragraphs. So for whatever the reason, the computer save gods had smiled upon me. I lost about half hour's worth of work. No big deal. Set about to hammering it out. I looked at the clock. Paper's due at 9. It's about 7:30. Okay, so we're having a truncated editing session, but the rest of it pretty much goes on as planned. And I get the paper done, and I look at the clock. It's 8 o'clock, and I think, I have an hour to spare. And, that should have been the indication that I was out of my mind. Anyway, I decided not to bother showering, that I would do that when I got home, and it turned out to be a very wise decision. Put on my winter getup, thick coat, gloves, scarf, hat, you name it. Tucked my paper under my arm and headed out the door. The snow had never stopped. It was still snowing. And I lived in an apartment complex which, let's just say, didn't care all that much about the amenities, like snow plowing. And I wondered whether I could even get on the road to get the paper to the professor, because not only had it kept snowing all night, not only had they not come and plowed the driveway, at the end of the parking lot, there was a pretty steep incline. And it was just fresh snow the whole way up, probably about 10 inches. And I thought, well, the guy said he's not taking late papers, so here we go. And I got in the car, and I got all the way to the foot of the incline. And I kicked it into gear, and up it went, and then down it came. There was no chance in hell that I was going to get out of that parking lot. Not this way, anyway. I know I wasn't going to do it because I tried no fewer than a dozen more times, not one of which got me any further along than any of the others. So I got out of the car by about 8:30 in the morning by now. It takes 15 minutes to get to campus. I've got 15 minutes or so to get up 15, 20 feet of incline. So I found a rock, a very large rock, flat rock. And given that it was an apartment and I didn't have a snow shovel, the rock would have to do. So I got down on my hands and knees with this idiotic rock, and I tried my best to pull all the snow off where the tire tracks were, figuring that if I could just get a bite on the tarmac as I started up the hill, I could make it. I did exactly that. I made it about a foot further, and I came back down. I got out of the car, I found the rock, I chunked off the snow again, I got rid of it. I got in the car, I drove up, I made it a foot farther. You see how this is going. It seemed to be about 57, 58 times later, I finally made it to the street. And the streets hadn't been plowed either, but there had been any number of cars that had been through, which had the net effect of packing the snow down pretty well. So I could at least get some traction. The entire ride was accomplished at about 15 miles an hour. What can you do? So I made it all the way to campus. It's already past 9 o'clock. I figure I might be screwed, but so it goes. I had to park pretty far away, actually, the student parking, probably about 1.5 miles from the building I had to get to. So I parked the car and I waited for the bus because it's 1.5 miles, and of course there's a bus. Except that the bus driver figured that nothing was plowed and it wasn't really in his best interest to start driving a bus. I came to this conclusion after waiting for the bus maybe 20 minutes. At which point I commenced on the 1.5 mile walk to the building. By the time I got there, it's about 10:30, maybe even close to 11. I'm just dripping with sweat. I find the professor. I take my coat off in his office, then my gloves, my hat. I start telling him the story and stop, looked at him and said, well, my guess is that you don't really care about any of this. And he said, nope, I really don't. And I handed him the paper and he said, okay then. And he left. Nothing about how late it was. Nothing about not taking it. Nothing about a grade penalty. Just handed him the paper and off he went. As if he were just sitting there waiting for my paper. Which, trust me, I know was not the case. Anyway, I don't know what lesson to draw from this, except maybe when roads are impassable, when the electricity goes out, when your iguana is too cold to survive the night, maybe different rules just apply. I live in Arizona now, so it's not like we'll ever face snow. It is often too hot for human life here. 115 or so is where we seem to top out. It's a little cooler, 5 degrees cooler on average than Phoenix. But it's still pretty fucking hot. Might be just as well. Anyway, back to Abingdon. The more I peck at this, the more I really like it. It shipped, to me, relatively dry, so it didn't require a whole lot of attention before packing it up in the pipe. that first draw, when you light it for the first time and you inhale the smoke into your mouth, it read to me for all the world like an English tobacco. It had that vague, soapy flavor to it that, most of us who smoke English tobaccos really, really enjoy. But it became something else, just the next light on. And I really like the something else that it became. It's certainly not the strongest Balkan blend I've ever tried, nor is it the best. I think Black House and White Knight are going to be sitting right up on top of this one. But it's a very good tobacco in its own right. I would say, well, give it a B+. I'll be back to it without question. And who knows, maybe by this time next year it'll be upgraded to an A-. We'll find out later. Till next week, see you soon.
H-A-R-R-I-G-A-N spells Harrigan. Proud of all the Irish blood that's in me. Devil a man can say a word again.
You're probably all wondering what the hell happened to the iguana. Because after the heat came on, he just kind of rolled, right? He was in the bed somehow with me, and then he disappeared. And it took me a while to find him, right? One day I came home, and he was just sitting there on that newspaper that I left out for him. Because, believe it or not, you can kind of train an iguana to go poo on the newspaper if you want. Anyhow, he lasted about another 6 months, and he got some sort of metabolic disorder that all of my iguanas ended up getting, whereby their lower jaws became misshapen, and then I had to euthanize him, which was a sad, sad day. I also thought from that day forward that maybe it's just not fair that I have iguanas around the house, because it's kind of like a death sentence when I got them. He was the last of the probably half dozen iguanas that I had. Sad to see him go. Wonder where he went for those 2 days when I couldn't find him. Kind of reminds me of my friend Dwayne Snake, who disappeared into his car and didn't come out again for about 4 months. I guess we play by different rules if we're in the reptile families. Anyway, have a special day. We'll see you next week.